So yesterday, you guys had some videos to watch and then follow-up questions. That was a little bit different. I don't normally do it that way. But I thought that was good. And then you've also been working on the Unit 5 practice or Unit 5 progress check. So in AP Classroom, they have a progress check for every unit, and we're finishing Unit 5 right now. So I gave you Unit 5 to do. I also opened up Unit 1, 2, 3, 4, not because I'm assigning them and taking grades and you have to hurry up and get them all done. It just opens up the questions so that you guys can practice. So you can pick and choose whether you want to accomplish the whole thing or some of it. But that way you have those to practice with. And also when we're getting ready for the May test, we're going to want those handy so we can do some practice with that. So today I did get some questions in the feedbacks that we wanted to go over pedigrees. So I'm going to go over pedigrees today, and I believe this should be the last of like new information. At the end, I have what questions do you have? So Tuesday, we have class together, and I don't have anything in particular. So I want to field questions that you guys are struggling with or concepts that you want more information on. Okay, so you guys can kind of help me out with the direction of that. So today we're going to do pedigrees. I'm going to give you a lecture. We have 4-question practice. And then over genetics concepts, I thought I'd put you guys into a breakout room for 11-question quiz. That way you guys can discuss, and we know that discussion is part of learning. So I have that for you. Right now, I'm planning to test our final exam through Illuminate Ed. Is everyone familiar with Illuminate Ed? Yeah. So the current test is 63 multiple choice questions and 6 math questions. So we seem to be in the exact same place we were last year on this day, if that gives anybody a sense of relief, to feel like you are going to be ready come May. We're in the same place as we were then. So we'll just go ahead and get started with AP. Pedigrees, if you were in biology, oops, look, I didn't change this. This is the same PowerPoint I made for biology last year. I think Lauren attended most of the Zooms. We had scattering. I think at the beginning of the COVID time, we had lots of people coming, and then it dwindled over time. So this may be a reminder, maybe you didn't really get it the first time, yada, yada. You need to be able to determine inheritance patterns, right? And so different ways that we can determine those patterns, one, simply looking at the percentage of offsprings, but 2, you can also look at how a trait is passed on through multiple generations, and you do that via the pedigree. So it's a chart used to trace the inheritance. They're like family trees in that they show relationships and they show generations. It's important that you know how to read a pedigree. So first of all, the symbols, the circle is always going to be a female. If it is not shaded in, the female does not have whatever trait you're following. If it is shaded in, she has the trait. So this doesn't necessarily mean she shows the dominance or she shows the recessive. Whatever trait you're following is either going to be dominant or recessive. So if I were following brown eyes and she has an unshaded circle, that would simply mean that she does not have brown eyes. It doesn't mean she's dominant. It doesn't mean she's recessive. That is determined later, okay? So the square, whether he's shaded or not, will be a male. If he's shaded, he has the trait, and if he's not shaded, he doesn't have the trait, okay? One of the practices I give you today is using red and blue instead of shade and unshade, but it gives you a legend to interpret that for you. Okay, so based on how the pattern is, we're going to determine inheritance. You may or may not see a half shaded. That would obviously indicate Heterozygous individuals could be this individual is a female who is a carrier, meaning they don't show the trait, which means it's recessive, right? The only way you can be a carrier is if it's a recessive trait. Otherwise, if it's dominant, you're guaranteed to show it, okay? This would be a male who is a carrier for the trait. But like I said, not all pedigrees will use this semi-shade as a giveaway. So sometimes you got to figure out if they're heterozygous. If you see a slash through a symbol, it means the person has passed on. The line in between is called, the line, notice this one is in between the shapes where this one is above the shapes. So in between the shapes, this is a marriage line. Of course, today, not everybody is married who has children, right? So it's representing a mating. So these two have a connection that has produced offspring. So a line coming down is indicating another generation. And then a line above that is indicating that these are brothers and sisters. Again, circles and squares, boys and girls. You would number them from left to right. So you would refer to the generation. If this was just the second generation, this would be individual 2-1, 2-2, 2-3, and 2-4. So the first number is the generation, what level they are in the pedigree, and then the second number is counting left to right. Twins will show a connection like this, meaning that they came from a single egg, and then they became two. So this is identical twins here, and this is showing paternal twins, or fraternal twins, sorry. Okay. So looking at inheritance patterns, remember autosomal means it's one of the first 22 chromosomes. If it was sex-linked, that would mean number 23. So this is any of the first 22 chromosomes, and what a typical recessive trait would look like. First of all, to know that it's autosomal, it doesn't seem to favor one gender over the other. So it's pretty equal between males and females. It doesn't have to be exactly equal. This example I have has 2 boys, 2 girls with the trait, so that's exact, but what I don't see is that it's all boys or it's all girls. It seems to affect both genders. The key to recognizing a recessive trait is that it skips a generation. This generation has no one with the trait. The only way for a person to have the trait, if their parents don't, is for that to be a recessive trait, right? So any affected individual, their parents may not have the trait. If it were dominant, a parent would definitely have the trait. So recessive traits, you know, only show up when they're homozygous recessive. So this individual would be like little r, had to get a little r from each parent, meaning the other letter, because they have the dominant trait, is the big R. So this is key examples. Cystic fibrosis and albinism are both examples of autosomal recessive disorders or traits. Okay. So here's an exercise for you to practice this one. PKU, phenylketonuria, is a recessive disease. And people who have this PKU, they lack a protein that's needed to properly digest their foods. So every baby, when you're born, you're tested for PKU so that they can immediately get you on treatment. So if you've ever been in the room, like the day a baby has been born, they maybe came and did a foot prick. And what they're doing is they're taking that blood sample and testing it for PKU. And later when we get into gene control, PKU comes up again, and that it was one of the diseases used to identify that each enzyme makes a specific protein. Okay, so when creating the pedigree, we want to start with a story. So Manny and Rosa are married and they both are healthy. Since they don't have PKU, I'm not going to shade them in. Now, what about their children? They have 3 children, which means I'm going to need to put another generation in. Their oldest, Jacob, has PKU. So will he be shaded or not shaded? Shaded. Their middle child, Erica, and also the youngest are healthy. That means they're not going to be shaded. So when drawing these pedigrees out, you want to start with the information you know. So I'm going to start with simply giving my 3 children. Oops. And Jacob has PKU, and then Erica and Matthew do not, so I don't shade them. Now, I think where people find pedigrees tricky is determining the genotypes of the individuals. So it's always easiest to start with the recessive traits, whether the recessive trait is the one you're showing or following or not, because we know that there is only one genotype possible for a recessive trait. So I would start by filling in Jacob. There's only one way he can have PKU, and that's if he's homozygous recessive. The next thing I would do is dominant traits. We don't know if they're homozygous or heterozygous, but we know they have at least one dominant allele. So I would start by distributing a dominant allele to each of the dominant traits. Now to fill in the rest. Jacob had to get his recessive traits from somewhere. So any person who is recessive homozygous, you can distribute their alleles to their parents. He had to have gotten 2 alleles, one from each parent. And so I now know that they are heterozygous. If Jacob had children, I would distribute his 1 allele to each child below him as well. Yes. Now, these 2, they could have gotten the dominant allele from dad or from mom. We don't know which means we don't necessarily know if their second allele is homozygous or heterozygous, right? They could have gotten dominant from dad and mom. They could have gotten dominant from dad and recessive from mom. They could have gotten recessive from dad and dominant from mom. Any of those would show the dominant trait. So I do not know their second allele. So I'm simply going to put a question mark. If they had offspring, I might be able to figure it out based on their offspring. Because like Jacob, I would distribute the alleles to the parents. Okay. So we're going to go to another generation. So Erica, the one in the middle, right here, remember she was H question mark. She meets Mo at college and the 2 become married. They have 2 daughters. The youngest daughter shows PKU, Amy does not. So you should start thinking probably what Erica's, right here, genotype is. So fill in the genotypes with the 4 individuals. So we need to add Mo and the 2 daughters. So here's Mo, and here's the 2 daughters. We know that the youngest has PKU. So I'm going to shade that one in. So again, it's easiest to start with the recessive trait. So I'm going to fill in homozygous recessive for Erica. Distribute both of her alleles to the parents. Any parent or sibling who has a dominant trait has 1 dominant allele. So here's Erica's recessive traits. And then we don't know, we're in the same situation again, right? You could be homozygous, you could be heterozygous, who's to say?
Hey, don't we not know about Mo either?
Oh, but, okay, so Mo is healthy. It does not say that. I need to add that to the story problem. And then Mo has to be heterozygous in order for the daughter to be able to get 2 recessive alleles. Yeah, they would have said Mo has PKU, so I need to add that he's healthy. Thank you. Okay, so that's autosomal recessive. It shows equally in both generations, or I'm sorry, both genders, and then recessive, it skips a generation. So dominant typically does not skip a generation. Every individual who is affected will have a parent who is affected as well. Recessive traits, they may or may not have a parent who is affected. That's where it skips a generation. So this dwarfism, achondroplasia, is actually a dominant trait, which is really quite interesting because a child of two dwarfs could have normal height. Wouldn't that be bizarre if you were like much taller than your parents? So because it's dominant, it does not skip a generation. Because it's autosomal, it will affect males and females the same. That means there are no carriers because you can't hide a dominant trait. You can only hide a recessive trait. So let's see how you would draw this out. So Richard and Nancy, named after my aunt and uncle, they're dwarfs and they're married. They have 4 children: Cindy, Chris, Mark, and Bob. They actually have 5 daughters. This is 2 of the daughters and 2 of the husbands. But they have 4 children: Cindy, Chris, Mark, and Bob. And that is the order from oldest to youngest. All the children except for Chris are dwarfs. Bob marries Carrie, also a dwarf, and they have 2 daughters, Jamie and Jenny. This is the first time I realized I used Bob twice in this story. I need to change one of them. Okay, so this is actually names from my family. Jamie, the oldest, has achondroplasia, and Jenny does not. My family does not have the dwarfism. I just used the names because they had a lot of people. I could follow them. Okay, so I'm going to start with what I know. So Richard and Nancy are both dwarfs, so I will shade them in. I must now give them 4 children. Cindy's a girl, Chris is a boy, Mark is a boy, and Bob is a boy. It says all except for Chris are dwarfs. So Chris, the oldest, is not, or the oldest of the boys, is not shaded in. Bob marries Connie. Oh, I guess I'm not using Bob twice. Here's Bob. He's going to marry Connie, so we have to give him a wife. She's also a dwarf. They have 2 daughters, Jenny and Jamie. Jamie has dwarfism and Jenny does not. Okay, so I will draw it out as I read it, and then I'll be able to give everybody their traits. So like I said, I find it easiest to start with my recessive traits. In this case, the recessive trait is not the one I'm following, so it'll be the unshaded individual. I also know that each individual who has the trait has at least one, we don't know the second one, has at least one dominant allele. So first I'm going to start with my recessive traits. I can distribute those alleles. I give each dominant person one dominant trait. I will distribute my recessive alleles to both parents. So this individual had to get a recessive allele from both mom and dad. This individual had to get a recessive allele from both mom and dad. So distributing those alleles. And because both parents are heterozygous, we don't know if this person is homozygous or heterozygous dominant. So they all become question marks. So in questions that you see on a test, they sometimes ask for the relationship between 2 people, maybe 1-1 and 3-1. That would be a granddad and granddaughter. They might ask for individuals' genotypes. So they might ask for the genotype of 2-2. So you have to be able to, you won't have to draw all of them out, but you'll have to figure out that one individual. They might say how many people have the trait, how many people don't have the trait. Are there any carriers, that sort of thing. Okay. So here's our last example. This is sickle cell disease. So sickle cell, remember, is a codominant trait. You get both normal cells and sickled cells. So if you're heterozygous, you have what's called the sickle trait. And if you're homozygous recessive, you have sickle disease. Okay, so we have to figure out the genotypes of these individuals. So take a minute. What ones would you want to start with? What do you feel pretty confident with? Who do you feel like you would know for sure? Anybody want to shout out? Or I can open up my chat box.
Arlene, Tom, Wilma, and Carla are all homozygous recessive.
Very good. Yes. Okay, so if I distribute all my recessive alleles, what's the next thing I want to do?
George is homozygous or heterozygous.
Okay, so the next thing I'll do is give everybody at least one dominant allele. And because Wilma is recessive, she got her recessive allele from George. So we know that George is also heterozygous. What about Sam? Homo or hetero?
Hetero.
Correct. What about Christopher? Homo or hetero? What do you guys think? He would be a question mark. Tom is going to make it so that Alan is heterozygous. We don't know about Tina because we don't have anything else from her family. All we know is that she has at least one dominant allele. So he could have got this dominant allele from either parent. And because Alan is carrying a recessive allele, he could have gotten a recessive allele from Alan. We don't know. So that would be a question mark. So we're going to give all our shaded individuals recessive alleles. Looks like I missed Carla there. Everyone who's healthy has at least one dominant allele. So I'm going to give them all H's. This was a lot of click, animate, click, animate, click, animate. And then George, as indicated, I think, by Corbin, was heterozygous because Wilma has a recessive allele to put up there. So does Tom. Sam and Anne, they don't have, Sam doesn't have any children, so I'm not so sure about him. Anne has a child, so she must have a recessive allele that she's hiding. Oh, I do know Sam because Arlene is going to give recessive alleles to all of her children. Good point. So Michael over here, Carla has a recessive trait, so she's going to give Michael. She didn't give it to him; she got it from him. A recessive allele, and then Alan is heterozygous, and Daniel because of Tom. And we're not so sure about Tina or Sandra or Christopher. So that's how you would work that out. This is one of my COVID lectures from last year, early COVID. Okay, so I put this link in Google Classroom as well. It's a self-quiz if you want to do that on your own. But what I have for you to practice, we have 4. Here we go. I have 4 practice problems for you in Google Classroom. This is our classwork of the day. So take a minute, see if you can figure out each of these 4 traits. So going up to the top, this one, you know, you really have to have 4 individuals showing the trait to know for sure. I see that it is skipping a generation, so definitely recessive. Now, is it sex-linked because only a male has it? I don't know. There's not, very many people that I'm tracking. So I said that it could be either autosomal recessive or sex-linked recessive. Hard to tell at this point. Oops. So I know that the parents don't have the same as the child, which means the parents have to be heterozygous. So if it were a female and she was heterozygous for a sex-linked trait, you'd superscript them on the X. Each of them, she's still XX, he's still XY. So he will only get it on the X. Okay. If this was a Y-linked trait, then every male would have the traits. and it would be on the Y. Because the female doesn't get the Y, she wouldn't get any of those traits. So only the males would show the trait. And because his dad doesn't have it, it's not a Y trait. Okay, again, this one, I think without more information, it's again hard to tell. It's in every generation, so definitely dominant. It affects both genders, so you're probably going to go with autosomal dominant. It could be sex-linked dominant, in which case the X's, like dad's X, will only be distributed to the females. The males will not show the same as dad because they're not getting dad's X. So again, it could be dominant with both parents being heterozygous because 2 of the offspring don't have the trait, or it could be dominant, sex-linked dominant because the boys don't have the trait. Hard to tell with just 2 generations. And then this one, definitely recessive, and I went with autosomal because it's even Steven, male, female, heterozygous because the parents don't have the trait. And then this one, again, most likely it's autosomal because both genders are showing the trait and dominant. But again, the boys don't have the same trait as dad, but the girls do. So perhaps it's sex-linked dominant. And the girls got dad's gene and not mom's. Mom would be heterozygous because she gives an X to this daughter with the recessive and gives, the dominant, and then gives this, whatever mom gives to the boys will definitely show because they're getting dad's Y. All right. Any questions on any of those?
Yeah. I'm kind of confused about the superscripting kind of part of it. So could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that's just the sex-linked traits. Let me just grab some kind of image I can. So we're putting alleles on, like XX just tells you it's a female. XY tells you it's male. Okay. This is like the 23rd chromosome from mom and the 23rd chromosome from dad. And any of the superscripts are any genes that are carried on that chromosome that I'm following. So this could be color blindness and hemophilia. I would put 2 letters. I put the C and the H. So this, by superscripting an allele, it says that it is carried on this in particular chromosome. So females will be XX, males will be XY. So females could be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. They could also be X little h, X little h. They could also be homozygous recessive. Okay, dad, XY, XY only can be homozygous. He can only be dominant or recessive. You would say hemizygous because he only gets half of it. So boys have a greater chance of having sex-linked recessive traits because they only have 2 alleles possible, right? So this is a 1 in 2 chance. The females have 2 versions where the other gene would cover up that recessive trait. So they only have a 1 in 3 chance from their possible alleles. If this one only had an X little h and X little h. Does that help, Monty?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. And then, are we on number 4? You're asking a question on number 4. Let me go back.
Yeah.
Okay, so mom isn't filled in. Wouldn't she be recessive twice if it was dominant? So if this were, oh yes, she would be, thank you. Yeah, and they got dad's big R and mom's little r would be hidden. Yes, thank you. So we got that one. And then autosomal recessive is when it affects both genders the same and skips a generation. Autosomal dominant when it affects both genders the same and it is in every generation. Every individual who's affected has a parent who has at least one parent who is affected. That will make it dominant. Recessives, individuals who are affected, their parents may not be affected. Any other questions on that one? Okay, I opened this quiz. If you want to stick around, because I have gone over that 30-minute ding dong. If you want to stick around and do these together, you can stick around and do these together. Otherwise, you can complete this quiz on your own. And that is all I have for today, because we want to spend our time doing our units, business, and our makeups and all that jazz. Study for the final exam.
We were kind of confused on number 3.
Okay,
Okay.
so
Okay, go ahead.
make like your Punnett square for the first. I need to pull it back up. For the two that you're like crossing, you'd have capital R and lowercase r times capital R and lowercase r. And there's only like when you do fill out your Punnett square, you'd have capital R, and then 2 capital R lowercase r's, and then only 1 lowercase r. So only 1 out of 4 chance that you would get that. And then you would make a Punnett square for the S's and the T's. And when you do it for the S's, you would have 2 capital S lowercase s. So that's a half chance. And then when you do it for the T's, you'd have only 1 capital T. So that's a 1/4 chance. I don't know if that made sense.
You can assume this Punnett square looks the same whether you're doing R's, S's, or T's, right? Because in both of them, you're dealing with 2 heterozygous individuals,
Oh, I
right?
see
So,
it now.
so change the letters, but the Punnett square still looks the same. So little r is what you needed in the first one. And when you do your box, there's only 1 out of 4.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the heterozygous version, we have 2 ways of getting heterozygous. Because you could get dominant from one parent and recessive from the other, or recessive from the first and dominant from the other. So, so there's 1/2 chance, 1 and 2. It's 2 out of 4, right? 2/4 simplified. And then big T is the same as the little t, the little s. That would be this box right here. So there was only 1 box that was possible. And then using our product rule,
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
we multiply the 3 together.
That it makes a lot more sense now that it was drawn out. So it's not mentioning any short plants. So that means both are homozygous dominant for being
Or
tall.
it could be 1 or 3.
Basically, you have a 3 to 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one, since you had homozygous little y's, you'd have a 2 to 1. Good job narrowing it down. You usually should be able to narrow questions down to a 50-50.
I'm gonna get going, everybody. Thanks for helping each other.
Adios, amigos y amigas.